I won't speak to, obviously, Budget 2012. That budget will speak for itself when we table it. I'll only say that we made a commitment. We made a commitment in election 2006 that we would maintain funding for the CBC. We kept our word. We made a commitment in budget 2000, in the campaign of 2008. We'll maintain the budget for CBC. We kept our word. We made a commitment in the last election that we will retable the budget that we had just prior to the campaign, which maintained funding for the CBC. We've kept our word. We also said in the campaign that we would balance the budget, and everybody has to do their part, which means the CBC has to do its part as well.
That was Heritage Minister James Moore bragging about the government's promise to increase funding for the CBC, and then admitting even the state broadcaster will have to cut a little bit of baby fat. As they say in the schoolyard, you can fight me, but you fight my gang. And the CBC feels like it's being ganged up upon in Ottawa. In Ottawa, they're ready to duke it out with the facts. And here is Sun News' John Robson to bring some facts to this, because he knows a thing or two about conspiracy theories. So, John, the CBC thinks the Harper Conservatives are conspiring to bring them down. What thinks you?
Yeah, I was almost late getting here. I was out buying some tin foil so I could sell them some hats. You know, I think where the situation is fairly clear on the face of it, and I don't know why you'd need to look for some sinister forces behind the need for government to cut back. But the other thing about reading this story about how there's this powerful right-wing conservative caucus and they're going to make all these things happen, it reminded me of a joke about two Jews in Tsarist Russia sitting on a bench, and one of them's reading the Yiddish Times, and he looks over, his buddy's got the Pogrom Post. He says, "Hi, what are you reading that for? It's full of vicious lies." And his friend says, but Saul, you look in your paper, you know, they're stealing our money, they're burning our farms, we have no power. In my paper, we control the world. I mean, I would love there to be this right-wing Tory caucus that can force real spending cuts and get rid of the state broadcaster subsidy and all that stuff. But unfortunately, here outside the tinfoil hat, that's just not how Ottawa works.
No, and even though the Tories have a majority government and can do whatever they want to the CBC, it's not likely they will do very much. And asking for the 10%, as they've asked from every other institution and department throughout the government, is not asking too much. What my worry is, what their worry is what we've been doing, demanding to see their financials, what the Ethics and Funding Committee is going to be asking to see their financials, to see how much of that in there is just gravy money. $1.1 billion a year. Do you need that amount of money, and what are you spending it on? I think they're scared to see that.
Yeah, and well, I think the CBC is worried about their position, and not unfairly. The problem the CBC has that they didn't create is they're meant on the one hand to be a government agency and operate with the accountability rules of government, but they're meant on the other hand to be a viable commercial concern, and they're meant to operate under the normal rules of commercial firms that do include a certain amount of secrecy about their business. And it's very hard for managers to do both. I mean, you have to remember again, the subsidy that the CBC gets from the government, that's not their whole operating budget. It's like, what would a private company be able to do if it got that much free money every year? It could run at a huge loss. And so the CBC is able to do a whole bunch of things and have reasonable prices on its commercial ventures, which extend as far as renting costumes and making wigs for people, because of the fact that they get this big bag of free money every year. And if they didn't get it, they'd have to behave a lot differently. But I think they know in the back of their minds that their whole position is an anomalous one. They should either be purely public and subsidized and not have commercial arms, or they should be a commercial venture. I think they'd be happier as a commercial venture, so I think they're worried about nothing. But they're certainly very worried about it. Finally, the spotlight's on them, and it's got to be uncomfortable.
I think a recent Abacus poll showed that I think 30% of Canadians wouldn't mind seeing the CBC privatized. I mean, what we have now, maybe $700,000, I think, a year it gets in revenues from the television side and revenues from advertising, but the $1.1 billion is needed. Yeah, there's a monitor now showing you, John, that the CBC, the ask is, do you think that this funding is too much for the CBC or just about right? And 60% of Canadians think it's too much funding they're getting from us. 9% think it's not enough, and 30% think it's about right. So a true majority of Canadians think it's too much of our money going to them for what we get. And I don't know the last time you covered even a minor story that attracted CBC to show up. There'd be 10 different units. I mean, there'd be CBC Gatineau, there'd be CBC Quebec, there'd be CBC Kemptville. I mean, if there's a CBC in Kemptville, it'd be there.
Yeah, and you know what happens to you when you get used to operating that way? You convince yourself you couldn't operate any other way. And so, but again, I want to emphasize, a lot of talent in the CBC, a lot of dedicated people. If they got moved to a more rational business model, and I think a business model would be preferable, or a more rational government model, I think they'd find that their situation was improved even in terms of the work environment. They'd have more fun and they'd do a better job. But people get comfortable, especially when they're being subsidized, and they get very irritable when their subsidy is threatened. So, and the CBC, I think, is not used to this kind of scrutiny, those kind of poll numbers. This didn't used to happen to them, and they don't know what to do with it. A lot of us have been taking the slings and arrows for a long time. We know how to shrug it off. We know where we're right. We're willing to persevere. We know where we're wrong. We're willing to fix things. But I don't think that they've been accustomed to this, and that's partly why they're being so hysterical.
This is sort of their D-Day, too, in a sense that they've got a court case before the courts now because the Information Commissioner wants them to fess up some stuff, and they want to do that, so they're appealing that. We've got the Ethics Committee wanting to sit down with them after that case is over to talk about it, and they're even inviting Sun News people to show up, discuss their frustrations with putting in over 400 Freedom of Information requests and getting nothing out of them. So I guess they do feel their backs are against the wall, and there must be a conspiracy against them.
Well, it's the easy explanation, but in this case, it seems to me it's such a silly one, because the fact of the matter is that their position is a problematic one for all kinds of reasons. I mean, yeah, here we are, and of course, if viewers want to take this into account, there's a conflict of interest here. We are in a commercial competition with a highly subsidized competitor. This makes our life difficult. It's harder to charge for online content when the CBC can give it away. And so there's all kinds of things that they're doing that make sense from the point of view in head office of making the CBC a dominant media player, but don't make sense from the larger public policy urge to have a competitive, interesting, fair media landscape. And that's the CBC's problem. Their position is unfair to other people. And that hurts because they don't think they're unfair people, and many of them, I'm sure, in their personal lives are not. But the subsidy creates necessarily unfairness in their dealings with other media outlets. And so it's got to change in the name of justice, as well as in the fact that the government's run out of money and can't really afford to start to spend it on anything, let alone this.
It's got two things going, the budget right now and a little bit of pressure coming. We'll have to see how this all comes out in the wash over the next 2 months with the committee hearings, the court cases, and the public backlash. Thank you, John Robson. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.